There are moments in royal history when titles, crowns, and palaces fade into the background, and what's left is something raw, something human. When Catherine, the Princess of Wales, faltered under the weight of expectation and relentless public gaze, Prince William didn't step away. He stepped closer. This wasn't just a story of royalty. It was a story of love that refused to break even when the world watched, waiting for cracks to show. Because before the Throne of Windsor, before duty and diamonds, there was a promise. You won't fall alone. And William meant it. If stories like this move you, if you believe real strength lies in love that stands through the storm, make sure to like, subscribe, and share this story. Because what we're about to uncover isn't just royal history. It is a reminder that even those born to rule are still bound by the same fragile, beautiful humanity as us all. There's something strange about silence inside a palace. It's vast, echoing, and yet somehow suffocating. You'd imagine it filled with laughter, the hum of staff, the clink of teacups. But sometimes it's just quiet. Too quiet. And on one particular morning inside Kensington Palace, that silence wasn't peace. It was weight. Catherine sat by the window, her favorite spot, the one overlooking the gardens. The same gardens where William once laughed with her during their early days when everything still felt simple. But now, those moments seemed like distant echoes. The headlines had turned colder, the flashes of cameras sharper, and every smile she gave to the world felt just a little less real. She wasn't falling in public, not yet. But inside, something was slipping. The pressure of perfection had become her invisible crown, heavier than gold, more cutting than any jewel. The tabloids didn't see it. The photographers couldn't capture it. But William could. He noticed it in the little things. The way her laughter had changed. Softer. Shorter. The way her eyes looked out at the world but didn't really see it. The way she'd stand before royal engagements, hands folded just a little too tightly, breathing a little too shallowly, as if trying to keep herself from breaking. It wasn't exhaustion from the duties. Catherine had always been composed. It was something deeper. You see, being perfect for the world comes with a price. You lose the right to falter. You lose the right to just be human. And behind the glittering facade, Catherine was paying that price every day. When news outlets began speculating about her absence from certain public events, the tone turned merciless. "Where is Kate?" they wrote. "Why has the princess gone quiet?" They said she was distant. Some even whispered she was unwell. But few understood what that word really meant in the context of royal life. To the world, royalty must never stumble. But the truth? Even queens in waiting have limits. One night, while the palace lights dimmed and the press waited for a story outside the gates, William found her sitting alone in their private living room. No diamonds, no crown, just a woman trying to hold herself together. Her eyes were red, but her voice was steady when she finally spoke. "Sometimes I think," she whispered, "that I wasn't made for this world." William froze, not because of what she said, but because of what it revealed. The weight she'd been carrying silently for years. It's easy to forget that Catherine wasn't born into royalty. She was born into warmth, into laughter, into ordinary love. And suddenly she found herself standing in the glare of global judgment. Every gesture dissected, every outfit turned into commentary, every whisper magnified. Imagine waking up knowing millions would judge how you looked, how you spoke, even how you smiled. Wouldn't anyone start to lose a piece of themselves under that kind of light? The fall didn't happen in one moment. It wasn't dramatic or public. It was quiet, almost graceful. Like a swan dipping beneath still water. No one saw it, not truly, except William. And when he did, something inside him changed.
Because he'd seen this before, in his mother's eyes, in her lonely grace behind palace walls. And he swore he'd never let history repeat itself. Not with Catherine. The next morning, while the rest of the world speculated about the next royal appearance, William canceled an engagement without warning. The palace issued a polite statement, scheduling conflict. But behind closed doors, it was something else entirely. He sat beside her, without cameras, without ceremony. Just a husband, not a prince. "Kate," he said softly, "you don't have to stand up for the world every day. You can just sit with me." It wasn't grand, it wasn't poetic, but it was real. And sometimes, in the quietest gestures, love speaks the loudest. Days turned into weeks. The press noticed her absence again. But instead of rushing her back into the public eye, William did something unexpected. He protected her silence. He took on more royal duties himself. He handled appearances, visits, and ceremonies. And each time someone asked about Kate, his response was simple and steady. "She's resting." He didn't owe the world an explanation, because for the first time, he wasn't protecting the monarchy. He was protecting her. Behind the palace walls, their world began to change. Catherine started painting again, something she hadn't done since before her engagement. William often joined her, sitting quietly nearby with a cup of tea, watching colors bloom under her hands. And slowly, she began to smile again, not for cameras, not for headlines, but for herself. It wasn't a recovery the world would ever understand. It wasn't about illness, or scandal, or rumors. It was about rediscovering the human heartbeat beneath royal protocol. And so, before the grand stage, before the throne, before the ceremonies, there was this moment. A woman rediscovering her strength. A man realizing that love, real love, means standing still beside someone, even when the world demands you keep walking. Kate fell, yes, but William refused to let her fall alone. Because sometimes the most powerful love stories don't happen under chandeliers or in palaces. They happen in silence, between two people who choose to hold on. It's said that every royal is raised with two hearts, one that beats for the crown and one that beats for the person they love. For Prince William, those two hearts had always lived in harmony until the day he realized that to protect one, he might have to risk the other. Because protecting Catherine meant breaking a few royal rules. The palace has its own rhythm, slow, ceremonial, precise. Every step, every smile, every way rehearsed to perfection. But William had never been the type to follow a script. He was his mother's son, guided by feeling, not formality. And when Catherine began to fade beneath the pressure of public life, William saw more than exhaustion. He saw echoes of another woman who'd once lived under that same crushing gaze. He still remembered it, the way his mother, Princess Diana, had smiled for cameras while her eyes told a different story. He was just a boy then, but those memories left marks that never faded. He'd watched how the palace could love with distance and comfort with silence. And this time, he swore he'd do things differently. The vow wasn't spoken aloud. There were no witnesses, no grand declarations. It happened one night, quietly, as William stood alone on the palace balcony, looking over the London skyline. He could see the lights of the city, millions of lives moving freely, unaware of the invisible walls that trapped those born to reign. He whispered, "Not her. I won't lose her to this." That was the night he made his silent vow. From that moment, he became a shield in ways the world never saw. He started stepping into the fire first, taking on press questions meant for her, handling delicate royal appearances that once drained her. When the press demanded photos of Kate, he told his team, let her rest. No appearances, no pressure. It was quiet rebellion, the kind that could only come from someone who knew the cost of playing by the rules. Behind palace doors, there were murmurs. Some aides worried that William's protectiveness might disturb the royal balance. Tradition, after all, was not kind to those who bent it. But William didn't care. He had seen what tradition had done to his mother, how the lack of protection had cost the royal family its brightest soul. And now, as he watched Kate slowly find her footing again, he realized something simple but powerful. Sometimes, defiance is the truest form of devotion. Their days grew softer. They began taking early morning walks through the palace gardens, away from the lenses, away from the noise. Catherine would talk, quietly at first, then more openly. "It's strange," she once said, smiling faintly. "I thought being part of this world meant losing who I am. But maybe it's about finding who I still can be." William smiled, not the polished grin of a prince, but the gentle one of a husband who had waited months to see light return to his wife's eyes. "That's who they should see," he said. "Not perfection, Just you. And yet, while their private world healed, the public one began to question. Royal commentators speculated that the couple was pulling away from traditional duty. Some accused William of being overprotective. Others whispered that Kate's quietness was a sign of weakness. But they didn't see what really lay behind it. Strength built on silence, and love built on endurance. Every time a headline criticized her absence, William turned it into fuel. Every time someone doubted her place, he doubled down on his vow. He began prioritizing mental health advocacy in his royal work, a subject once considered taboo among the monarchy. He spoke openly about resilience, about the invisible weight of expectation. Though he never mentioned Catherine directly, his message was clear to anyone who truly listened. Even those who seem to have everything, he said once, can feel like they are losing themselves. The greatest strength is knowing when to ask for help and when to stand beside someone who needs you. It was one of his most emotional speeches, and Catherine was watching from home. When he returned that evening, she didn't say a word. She just held his hand. Through those quiet moments, a new kind of royalty was being shaped, one that valued love over image, authenticity over tradition. The world started to notice. Slowly, headlines changed tone, from criticism to admiration. Kate's quiet comeback, they began to call it. But the truth was, she never made that comeback alone, because William never left her side long enough for her to truly fall. Still, it wasn't easy. There were nights when duty clashed with devotion, when the royal schedule demanded their presence, when public expectations became storms they couldn't ignore. And during those moments, William faced the hardest part of his vow, balance. He couldn't protect her from everything. He could only stand with her through it all. One evening, before an important royal gala, Catherine hesitated at the mirror. Her reflection was flawless, every detail perfect. But her eyes betrayed the same fear she'd once felt. William noticed. He reached out, took her hand, and simply said, "If you stumble tonight, I'll stumble with you. That's the deal." She laughed, quietly, that soft, genuine laugh he'd missed for months. And when they entered that ballroom, they did so not as a perfect royal couple, but as two imperfect souls walking in unison. By now, the vow had grown into something larger than words. It had become their rhythm. He didn't promise her a life without storms. He promised to hold the umbrella when it rained. He didn't vow to silence the world's noise. He vowed to be her calm inside it. That's a kind of love the crown can't command. It's the kind that must be owned every single day. And so, behind the grandeur of the royal title and the centuries-old walls of Windsor, a different kind of story was quietly being written. Not about monarchy, but about humanity. A prince who refused to repeat the mistakes of history. A woman who found strength in being loved without conditions. And a marriage built not on fairy tale illusions, but on truth, the kind that survives even when the cameras turn away. William's vow was never announced, never recorded in any royal chronicle. But its proof lives in every look they share, every hand he holds, every quiet moment when he chooses love over legacy. Because before the throne, before the crown, before the world, he chose her. Years passed, but that single vow, quiet and unrecorded, shaped everything that came after. What began as survival slowly became strength. What was once silence turned into a voice that would change how the world saw the royal family. Because love, when it's real, doesn't just heal, it transforms. The palace lights still gleamed, the cameras still flashed, and the public still watched, but something had shifted between them. Catherine was no longer just a princess. She had become something far more powerful, the heart of the modern monarchy. Gone was the timid woman weighed down by expectation. In her place stood someone who knew her worth, who had learned that grace doesn't mean silence, and that vulnerability is not weakness, it's courage in its purest form. And beside her, always, was William, steady, calm, quietly protective. The world began to see him differently, too. Not just as the heir to the throne, but as a man who chose love before legacy. There's an old saying, the crown may rest on one head, but it's carried by two hearts. And nowhere was that more true than in William and Catherine. They began appearing together more often, but the energy was different now. There was ease in their laughter, a softness in their glances. You could see it in the small things, The way he'd guide her gently through a crowd, or the way she'd glance up at him before speaking, as if checking they were still in rhythm. They weren't performing royalty anymore. They were living it on their own terms. The public noticed. Kate's glow returns, one headline said. But what they called a glow was actually peace, the peace of a woman who had fallen and been caught. She began speaking more openly about causes close to her heart, children's well-being, mental health, family life. Her voice was steady, warm, and filled with purpose. And when she spoke, people listened, not because she was a princess, but because she was real. Every word she said carried a quiet message, that strength is gentleness, that love can be fierce, and that even in a palace, humanity matters. One evening, during a royal charity event, the cameras caught something the public had rarely seen. William, standing behind her as she spoke, pride softening his face. It wasn't the polished expression of royal duty. It was a look that said, "She's doing it." She found her voice. And in that simple moment, no speeches, no announcements, the vow he made years ago fulfilled itself. He hadn't lifted her up to stand beside him. He'd stood beside her until she could rise on her own. Their story became more than romance. It became reflection. Because every couple, royal or not, faces their version of a storm. Every person carries a crown, some visible, some invisible, of expectation, duty, or fear. And when life pushes us to our knees, what really matters is not how quickly we rise, but who's willing to kneel beside us until we do. That's what William did. That's what made their love story not just royal, but universal. As the years moved on, the world grew to love them not for their perfection, but for their imperfection, for their honesty, their struggles, their quiet resilience. In every public appearance, there was something grounding about them, as if they were reminding everyone watching that behind the thrones, behind the rules, behind the power, there are people trying, learning, and loving just like everyone else. Their story was no longer just about a marriage. It was about endurance, the kind of endurance that defines character. And perhaps that's the real meaning of royalty. Not the jewels or the ceremonies, but the example you leave behind when the world isn't watching. Years from now, history books will record the reign of King William and Queen Catherine, but what they may never fully capture is this. Before the throne, before the titles, before the destiny, there were two people who chose to face the fall together. Because that's what love truly is, not the absence of struggle, but the presence of someone who refuses to walk away. So when people look at them today, standing side by side, smiling before the world, what they don't see are the nights of doubt, the tears behind palace walls, the soft whispers that said, "I'm here, always." And maybe, just maybe, that's what makes their story unforgettable. Because fairy tales tell us love conquers all. But real life, their life, shows us something deeper. Love doesn't always conquer. Sometimes it simply endures. And in that endurance, it becomes unbreakable. And that, right there, is what makes William and Catherine's story more than just royal history. It's a reflection of us all, of love tested, of faith restored, of the courage it takes to keep holding on. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that strength can be silent and love can be simple, then go ahead and click that like button, subscribe, and share this video with someone who believes in the quiet kind of love that stands the test of time. Because in the end, before the throne, before the title, we're all just people trying to hold on to what matters most.